John chapter 10 is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. It's really a model for ministry, and I sort of pattern my ministry after it. My lesson today is going to explain why I find that to be such a profound impact on a vacation. The feature in this little passage, if you want to know a good definition of a pastor is like my dad's three-legged milk stool back in the barn. And each one of those legs had a message. One leg, as a pastor, had to be in the Bible. That's where you kept the first leg. The other leg happened to be in the throne room in heaven, where you got your information from the Lord himself. That's prayer. The third leg happens to be right in the heart of people. And in our story today, the chapter starts with Jesus. He's having what we would call a hockey fight with his critics. In the previous chapter, John 9, Jesus had just healed a blind man. And when he did, the Pharisees, they dropped their gloves and they wanted a fight. Jesus, you see, he had healed the man on the Jewish Sabbath. He broke the biblical law when he did. Jesus had broken the law of Moses. And the Pharisees, who are now confronting Jesus, they're the paid policemen by the Jewish temple. They make up the religious cops for the high priest. And here they are. Something terrible has happened. It's happened on the Sabbath day. They now rush in to make an arrest. They found this blind man, examined him, and were told that Jesus had done it, and he healed him on the Sabbath. Now comes the word, impossible. That can't happen. It's impossible to be healed on the Sabbath day. Keeping the Sabbath was paramount to Jewish law. Healing this blind man was a game misconduct. The Pharisees, they wanted the parents to be understood what happened. So they cross-examined the parents, and they found that he was blind from birth. Think of the punishment. Healing a blind man on the Sabbath, and then excommunication. The blind man removed from the church membership, and he was booted out of the church because of that healing on the Sabbath. Chapter 10 now of John shows me the difference between Jesus and the Pharisees. This blind man is the object of disagreement. Remember, the blind man, he's helpless. He's a human being. But from the day that he was born, he's always needed help for everything. Touch, feel, smell, hearing, tasting. They became his eyes. And the Pharisee was trained to be the care of the blind. He was taught to be a good shepherd, but he wasn't that. His responsibility was to look after those that needed help. They didn't. Jesus accepted that responsibility. Excuse me. And he helped the blind man. Now watch carefully how the Pharisee and Jesus cared for the blind man. The Pharisee totally snubbed him, insulted him. They attacked him with questions. They tested his qualifications for being a member of the synagogue. How dare you consider yourself being in the company of the people accepted by God? When he didn't pass the test, they turned on him, kicked him out, and chucked him out into the ash heap. No sinners allowed. You're under arrest, they said. These are the temple policemen. They were judge, jury, and jailer. And they passed judgment and they did the evaluation. They did a good job. It all took place, all in Jesus' presence. He was there to see it. And in contrast, Jesus saw a human need. He didn't ask any questions about the man's sin. He didn't ask any questions about his parents or his history. That blind man needed help, and Jesus helped. And what help he received? He restored his sight. What's this lesson going to teach me? It's to do with one's response toward one another. Did it help them to be better? Does it help them to become more responsible? The Pharisees would say, why heal the blind man and make him a worse sinner than before? Just follow the law of God and Moses. And if you go around helping people without obeying God's law, in the long run, you're not helping them at all. That was what the message was from the policeman. In other words, what's the best? To be blind all your life and submit to the rules of the Pharisee of the police and then go to heaven? Or to give sight back to the blind and break through and break all those rules and send the poor guy to hell? That's the crux of the lesson. When the blind man went to the services in the synagogue, blind, he was righteous. When he was healed, in his blindness, he was defied by the law, and he broke the Sabbath. So here he was, kicked out. Now along comes our Lord. Here's what Jesus taught. What good does it do to keep all the rules if when you're healed, they now become less of a person? And if you're listening to me and you're well, share your wellness and your compassion to the less fortunate. If keeping the law is your primary goal, but you have no compassion, where does that end up? You haven't helped them at all. Jesus is saying here, it's better to show compassion than be right. Jesus is saying further, it's better to be a person who sees the brother and sister and his father-in-law in heaven in the context of love. Spend love being forgiven and spend love being restored. That's better than the treatment that the police conducted over this poor blind man. John, our writer, tells a story of the Good Shepherd. When Jesus was the Good Shepherd, the Pharisees, the police, they realized they knew Psalm 23. These people were theologians. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. They knew who the shepherd was. They all knew the prophet Isaiah's words as well. God will gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead the mother sheep. Isaiah 40, verse 11. Well, those police officers, they knew that. And they also knew what Ezekiel wrote. He told them that they were shepherds leading the sheep and the lambs astray. In the John passage of John 10, Jesus says, I know my own, and they know me. And then verse 14, and he says, I know the Father. Jesus knows us as persons. He knows our names, and he knows our needs. And if we're blind, we are the wonderful creations of a living God, and he sees God's imprint on us when he heals us. That's our DNA, our IQ. Each of us, infinitely worth knowing. Jesus, in turn, wants us to know him as well as he knows us. 4 times in John 10, Jesus said he laid down his life for his sheep. In John 10, 11, 15, 17, and 18, it's repeated. It's the characteristic of God the shepherd. The willing good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. And the temple police Pharisees are wolves that ravage the sheep and they scatter them. Their only reason to be with the sheep is to make money. Jesus, on the other hand, was God's shepherd, and he cared for the sheep enough to lay down his life for it. Remember, Jesus went to the cross all on his own. It wasn't of necessity. He wasn't made to do it. He had a host of angels just waiting so he could escape the terrors of the crucifixion. But Jesus didn't. His interests were in the other ones, the ones that he leads. He was interested in you and me. And if you refuse to give up his life, he would no longer be called the Good Shepherd. Jesus sacrificed his life, produced your resurrection in your life, and your Jesus is the one who lives for others, and he conquered death, and the result was to live in triumph and love. Once upon a time, there was a young man who was a very poor student. To him, school was impossible. His mind was blind. Everything academic. He had no interest. He failed every subject in grade 8, and he made it in high school in the subject of physics. And when he took physics, his final grade was 0. He didn't even get 1 grade. He took Latin, algebra, and English, and he flunked all 3. He didn't play sports. Everything he tried, he failed. Socially, he was just awkward with people. He wasn't disliked by the other students. No one cared about him. Outside of the school hours, a classmate never said hello. When a school dance came along, he would have loved to go to the dance, but he was too bashful to even ask a girl. He was too afraid that he'd be turned down. If he had words to put on his t-shirt, it would probably read, "Leave me alone. I'm a loser." He knew it, his classmates knew it, and his teachers knew it, and so did the girls. But he made up his mind early in his life that he was going to make himself invisible. He was going to go into hiding, just be the blind man, and hope that others never came along to see who he was. Well, this young man was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, November the 26th, 1922. His uncle, his dad's brother, visiting the family shortly after his birth, he looked at this little guy in the crib and he nicknamed him Sparky. And it was a name that stuck with him all his life. He was called Sparky. It was a bit of a put down. Nothing in his life spoke of his name. He was anything but Sparky. Sparky's father was German. His mother, Dana, she was Norwegian. And they made their home in St. Paul. Carl worked as a barber. And throughout his growing up days, as a youth, Sparky, he and his father, they would share their Sunday mornings reading the funny pages in the paper. Sparky was fascinated with the strips of Popeye and Mickey Mouse. And from those minutes with his father, Sparky started doodling with a pencil and paper. His mother, Dana, watched her son sketch little cartoons on the dining room table as a desk. And as a senior in high school, Sparky enrolled in a correspondence course in drawing. His mother spent money she didn't even have for him to take the course, and he loved it. And in his senior year, he submitted some of his drawings to the editor of the yearbook. Well, they were all turned down. Sparky was not deterred. He continued drawing, and his characters took on personality. And then in 1943, two monumental events happened within days of each other. Sparky's mother, whom he was very close to and loved very much, and she was his tutor and did the teaching and paid for his courses, passed away. She had cervical cancer. The other event in 1943, shortly after his mother died, was the beginning of World War II for the Americans. Sparky boarded a troop train to begin his Army career. He joined up as a soldier. And for the rest of his life, this period of time haunted him with two experiences: the loss of his mother, who alone was his inspiration, and the other was the realities of war. And after returning from war in the fall of 1945, Sparky settled with his father in an apartment in his dad's barber shop. He was determined to become a cartoonist. He submitted his work to the Saturday Evening Post. His cartoons featured little children who acted out their little lives in words and actions well beyond their years. The publications went national. Sparky's main character was called Peanuts, and his little dog was called Snoopy. The first Peanuts strip appeared October the 2nd, 1950, in a series of newspapers nationwide. Sparky at the time was 27 years old. The popular appeal of Peanuts was Sparky's ability to portray characters in ways that other cartoonists couldn't. Charlie Brown was born, so was Linus, and so was the security blanket. The rise of Snoopy's popularity in the 1960s was so direct that Sparky had a brand new beginning. Failure in sports, classrooms were dominant with themes of Sparky's cartoons, and his humor was sarcastic. It was often bittersweet, sometimes silly, occasionally flights of fantasy that his mother had praised him for. Do you know who Sparky's name was? Charles Schulz. When Schulz announced his retirement in 1999, the Peanut comic strip was syndicated over 2,600 newspapers worldwide, with book collections translating over 25 languages. Charles Schulz has been awarded with the biggest honors, Emmy Awards, NASA spacecraft named after one of his characters, concert performances in Carnegie Hall. Charles Schulz went from darkness to sight. His childhood failure became the miracle sight for children around the world. From that little boy loser, the chronic underachiever, to the little character called Peanuts. That little cartoon character whose kite wouldn't fly, Charlie Brown, who never succeeded in kicking a football. All of Charles Schulz's little cartoons was his own disastrous beginning. And in our passage today, Jesus tells a story of a Charles Schulz back in that day, blind from birth, a diamond in the rough, just waiting to be discovered. Before the precious jewel came out, it was refined by fire, blindness, rejection, excommunication, humiliation, and then suffering. Then came the words and the voice of encouragement from Jesus. I restore your sight. Schulz's mother had restored Sparky with his sight. Talent just beginning, the whole world was going to come and flee to his doorstep. If you only open the door, I want you to keep drawing. This world is blind to cartoons. You can open their eyes. One day when I get to heaven, I want to meet this blind man. I want to hear the story how Jesus took his eyes and gave him sight. I've had a lot to deal with blindness. I had an aunt, my dad's sister, who had blindness, and I got to know Aunt Margaret very well. And then my brother had a daughter, and she is blind, and she's been blind almost since birth. Got a PhD at the University of Toronto in music. But I've learned a lot from Lori. Lori's giving me more insight than some of the great theologians that I study. And maybe you're here today and you've been a loser. Maybe there's something in your life that you haven't been able to see. Well, sometimes people come along just like Sparky's mom and says, you've got a gift that I want you to show to the world. Get busy. I'm going to give you the paper and I'm going to give you the pencil. You do the drawing. Well, from that drawing came Peanuts. And from Peanuts came Charles Schulz. And from that came a story that's so remarkable that it's repeated all the time in our local newspapers. Well, that's my lesson today. I hope you got something from it. I'll look for you next time. Thanks for coming.